Good morning, everyone. We're continuing our How to Work with People series based on Swami's wonderful book, The Art of Supportive Leadership. I know I sound like a broken record sometimes, but when I take the trouble, which is the privilege that all of these broadcasts that I do give me, of going word by word through Swami's books, I just can't believe. I mean, genius doesn't even begin to explain it. Just his insight into human nature, into life, into energy. It's really quite astonishing. It's going to be a long time before the world catches up to what he's given us. So, in the meantime, let's do our little bit. So, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel the living presence of your guidance, that everything we do will be inspired by a profound and deep understanding of the true purpose of our life, which is to draw ever closer to the divine within. Om. Peace. Amen. Now we've been right in the middle of this chapter where it says leadership means putting aside personal desires. Now Swamiji comes into a very interesting clarification on what that actually means. I stopped in the middle of a paragraph yesterday, so I'm going to read the first few sentences and then go on. While not allowing himself to be guided by his personal feelings, however, he must keep himself open, at least, to consider the feelings of others, especially those of his subordinates. That is, quite simply, the sacrifice of leadership, meaning that I don't get, my feelings may be ignored, but I can't ignore the feelings of others, and that's what we're talking about today. Especially those of his subordinates. Swami puts the feelings of others, especially those of his subordinates. And part of the reason he says that, see, this is what I mean about really tuning in to what Swami is saying, especially the feelings of his subordinates, because they're helpless. And people who are helpless, who are made to feel even more helpless, generally find a way to strike back. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect. But your subordinates are subject to the decisions that you make, and therefore you want them to feel that your decisions are fair, considerate, take them into account, respect them, and you are relying upon your subordinates in order to make the project a success. So especially those of your subordinates, because if their feelings are consistently trampled upon, you'll pay for it later. That's the only way I can put it. They'll wait for the opportunity to get back at you. And now this is where we're starting today. For the feelings of others must be recognized as a factor in the formula of what is trying to happen here. You can't just pretend that they're just chess pieces that you can put into place. They have their own flow of energy, and you have to, the leader's art form, the media of expression for a leader is other people's energy. And people's feelings profoundly and deeply influence their ability to put out energy, the quality of that energy, and the quantity of that energy. And what is trying to happen here is a question that also involves whether or not the people who are part of the team are able, willing to add their energy to the mix. And if they're not, then what is trying to happen here it cannot rely on their participation. Unless he can win support for his ideas, the best project may amount to nothing, since there will be no one to give it sufficient energy for the project to succeed. Other people's energy. If he cannot win the support of his subordinates, especially, he may well have no alternative but to wait. There were so many times, and Swami writes about this in other parts of leadership when he's talking about himself, when there was a very good project and there were even capable people, but he wasn't able to win the understanding or the support or the cooperation of Swamiji, of his subordinates. The project just had to be put aside, oftentimes forever, but certainly for a while, because there was just no energy to make it happen. You can't force the energy. Well, let me phrase it differently. In the kind of leadership that we're trying to learn here, which is the long-term welfare of everyone concerned and the success of the project, you can't just force people to do it. I knew someone who, over a period of years, created a series of charitable organizations. All of them were legal entities, complete with government-approved constitutions and bylaws. The only thing missing, and the reason he kept creating new institutions, was a working membership. After years of presenting people with so many workable plans, he expressed his frustrations to me one day. "I've done all the groundwork for them," he complained. "Why don't they come forward and carry on the work?" I know this person and this situation, and yeah, it was always so confusing. I was peripheral to it, but he had all these good ideas about how the world could be made better, and his concept was to create on paper an entity, and that somehow once that entity was created, then everybody would step forward to do it. He failed to realize that that's just paper, and that good works are done by people who have the heart for it. He failed to realize that not only are organizations made up of people, but that people are made up of feelings. Unless those feelings are enlisted, no organization can come into existence. You know, there's the word chitta in Sanskrit, which is the feeling of the heart. Chitta is where the heart is located, or the chitta is related to the heart. And the heart is where, when we speak of it, where our likes and dislikes reside. And reason always follows feeling. This was Master's profound and important aphorism that we always have to understand. Reason follows feeling. Whatever we are predisposed to feel, the mind will always find reasons for it. Think how many times personal attachment to someone has completely blinded us to the realities of that person's nature. Perhaps the person is an alcoholic, or is unfair or unreasonable in the demands he places on others, even abusive. But if there is a predisposition to favor that person, the mind will justify all the wrong behavior, and you won't even see it. You won't even realize that this person has a drinking problem, or an anger problem or something, and it's called being in denial. And then after a period of time, you wake up and you wonder, how could I have been so blind to the simple reality of what this person was like? Because reason follows feeling. How can people actually persuade themselves that the Jews are the enemy, or people with dark skin are inferior, or such and so, or race, was born to be the slaves of another race. Reason follows feeling. People who are very, very intelligent can come up with very intelligent, well-reasoned feelings, justifications for the prejudices of their hearts. And the prejudices go in all sorts of ways. We don't want to admit our own limitations. We don't want to admit our own needs. We don't want to be seen as not carrying our share. We're afraid of too much intimacy, just countless things. And the mind just comes up with all these reasons. But chitta is the essential substance of consciousness itself. Deep feeling is what makes us human beings. It's what distinguishes us from inert objects, is our ability to feel pain, to feel joy, to feel longing, all the things that we feel. Human beings, an institution is made up of the people who are in it, and people are made up of feelings. And so we just can't pretend that people are just the work they do. All the work that they do comes from how they feel about what they're doing. And winning the hearts of people for what you're trying to accomplish, either you win it out of your loyalty to their well-being, and then they will in turn give loyalty to the entity that supports them, or to you as the leader, because you have proven to them that their welfare is important to you, and that will inspire in them appropriate respect and gratitude and fair play and all these other realities. And ideally, you can inspire in people some of the idealism you have. Of course, going to the life of Ananda and all that we're doing, when I arrived in 1971, I was in favor of what we were doing. I thought it was pretty interesting that we were going to make a community, and we were going to do this for Master, and we were going to have this retreat, and we were going to teach people to meditate, and we were going to share these wonderful teachings. All that was fun. But it was a long, slow, sort of steady process on Swamiji's part of just constantly communicating and inspiring, communicating and inspiring, communicating and inspiring. And then I watched this sort of opening within myself of feeling, of just the privilege of what I was doing, and the benefit to the world of what I was doing, and the integrity of the entity that I was involved in. And I could have reasoned all of that out right from the start, but over really literally many years, it was the feeling level of it that really gave me the unshakable faith that I feel that I have now in what we're doing and why. There was a thought I had right there. Let me find it. Just give me a second. Oh, phooey, it slipped away. I wanted really to bring it out. Darn it. Nope, it's lost. I'll have to just go on with it. So he also said, I've often talked to people. I've complained. I've complained in this sense, complained to Divine Mother that Ananda's success also, in a certain way, is unfortunate in this respect. When Ananda itself had so little form and so little of a physical nature that we could really represent as actually consistent with our, as Swami said, we have to make Ananda on a physical level sufficiently refined that people will see, because of the refinement they see in the external form, it will help them to understand that the ideas of what we're doing also have great refinement to them. Especially, he said, in the USA, where material well-being, where money is easier to come by and material development is easier to accomplish compared to countries where the economy is so stretched that that simple and primitive is more the norm, and it's difficult to reach beyond that. Even too much wealth becomes suspicious. There must be some corruption involved if too much wealth is engaged. But in America, if you're too primitive, people will think there must be something wrong with what you're doing. So Swamiji had to teach us that we needed to bring Ananda as a whole up to a certain level of refinement, was the word he used, which was a very good word, so that people will then trust that our ideas also have an equal level of refinement. And so working through coming to an understanding of all of that on a feeling level, was many of the things that we had to do. But the difficulty then is when you have, as we have here in Silicon Valley where I live, we have this beautiful temple. It was built as a Catholic church about 1950. Very, very well built. Our builders who've had to deal with some of the structure of it remark that it's overbuilt in the sense that it looks like it was probably done by Catholic workers who were part of the congregation who really built it for Jesus, because it's extremely well built and beautifully built and architecturally lovely. Very simple, but very spacious, very gracious. And of course, it's opened the door to our being able to do many things, especially in the sanctuary, because it's just so lovely and elegant and spacious. We can dance up the aisles. We can have a complete theater production on the dais. It's wonderful in that respect. But the problem is it's really there, and it's really physical. And just as it helps people to understand who we are, because the structure is a reflection of our consciousness, also it gives people the idea that the structure has something to do with who we are. Or it doesn't. And I try to say that to people. It's unfortunate that Ananda keeps developing, because people begin to think that Ananda is what we've created physically, whereas Ananda is only the people who are in it. Period. That is the reality of Ananda. A building is just a place for us to gather and do fun stuff together. I remember the idea that I had a little while ago. In watching Swamiji train me and observing it in retrospect as it has happened, I realized that what changed me and brought me into a deeper and deeper level of commitment and a deeper and deeper understanding of what that commitment meant was the time when I felt inspired. And of course, I'm inspired by ideas. I love ideas. Wisdom is one of the 8 manifestations of God, and I like wisdom. Wisdom works for me. But joy is what really works for me. And it is also one of the 8 manifestations. And what has happened over decades literally, is that something would happen always in when he was living, of course, in relation to Swamiji. And I would be lifted in my feelings, in chitta, in the refined aspect of the feeling nature of my soul. I would be lifted, and I would have a perception of of my own potential, of the potential of every other sentient being. I would have a perception of a changed reality from just what I can reason out. And even though those peaks would gradually fall back to more of the ambient level of my life, each time one would happen, it would enlarge my feeling nature and would increase the capacity of my reason to act in harmony with my elevated feeling. And when I eventually had to assume more first-line responsibility, which is the work that I've done for the last 30-some years here in this community, which I don't have that first-line responsibility now, but for a long time I did. I began to define my responsibility in a very simple way, which was to do everything I could to help create for others moments of deep inspiration. Because if there could be a consistent experience among those who were sent here to learn about these teachings, there could be a consistent experience of deep inspiration that would activate the chitta nature, that would activate the heart. And as the heart became activated, all the reason would follow. And as heart became activated, magnetism would develop, which that magnetism itself would bring deeper opportunities. And I remember a period of time, just exactly like this, when we needed, it was actually for, I think, for one of our entities, we needed more employees there. And there was someone in our congregation who seemed like they would be very good for that work. And we asked this person if they wanted to take the responsibility. They didn't. And it had to do with money, it had to do with benefits. And we kept upping the ante, like, what would it take for you to really be willing to accept this responsibility? But it finally came out that there was no way that that person would ever accept the responsibility, because their feelings were quite holding on to a completely different reality. And it was exactly what Swami said. Oh, this just isn't trying to happen. And we were surprised and a little disappointed, but we also had to say, this is how people feel. And in another complete context, Swami said the job of the leader is when you can't get the cooperation of your subordinates, when they don't see what you see, it's either a lack of communication or there's a gap in the consciousness, meaning they don't see the vibration that where they're living does not allow them to perceive the same potential for themselves or for the situation that you perceive. And so the leader has to step back and increase the communication and do what they can to shift consciousness. So that's what Swami's talking about here. And in order to do that, the leader has to be very disciplined about their own feelings. That doesn't mean that you don't know what they are. And this is one thing also that we have to understand about feeling, which is exceedingly important. It's not that you don't experience it, it's not that you don't acknowledge it, but to experience it, to acknowledge it, and then you make a separate decision as to what to do about it. If we're not conscious, the feeling simply dictates to the reason, then the reason doesn't even know it's being compelled by feeling. It just has lots of reasons for what it's going to do if we have suppressed and have not acknowledged what the feelings are. But what confuses people when they have muddy thinking, which leads to chaos, is that if I acknowledge the feeling, that automatically means that it's going to run my life. No, not at all. In fact, just the opposite. It's when it's unacknowledged and it has to kind of become covert in the way it influences us, that's when the chaos ensues. But if we just know, it's just right out front. This is, whether you talk to everybody else about it is another question. That is the issue of what should be done about this. Because many times in my life, I can say, and I've learned to do this. Before, I just used to pretend I didn't have these feelings. That did not work well. I highly don't recommend that. But this is how I feel. I acknowledge this. And oftentimes how I feel is like a spoiled brat. And I do feel like a spoiled brat, or like a dramatically unappreciated, so sincere, but nobody really loves me. There's all these different ways. I'm slightly mocking it, but it is not funny when you feel it. There's not an ounce of humor in it. It's completely real, and it can be devastating. I try so hard and nobody appreciates me. Once again, they misunderstand. everybody has a long story. Or, yes, it proves just what I always thought was true, which is I'm just a piece of cheese and absolutely worthless. But say it out loud, to yourself at least. Say it out loud to God. And then you say, now what is the appropriate response? And sometimes the appropriate response is, I really have to communicate to relevant parties about whatever's going on, because I have to, because it is my truth, and I have to say it. And sometimes, and this is the discipline of the leader, given that I feel this way, how am I going to manage? Because my responsibility is more important to me than the opportunity to be ruled by these feelings. And of course, as a leader, we have to gradually work through this. We can't be presumptuous about our own freedom. I've been in positions where I've had very strong feelings about something. But, and sometimes it's just very strong, biased in favor of someone. But it can't be, you can't act on that bias because it will disrupt a whole lot of other things. It's not all negative feelings. Sometimes it's attachments, personal attachments. But then one stands back and says, what's Dharma here? What is really the right way to behave? And very interestingly, and I'll speak for myself, my life has been saved many times. Saved meaning saved from further karmic entanglement by the fact that my commitment to Dharma, commitment to duty, my responsibilities as a leader, I may have these feelings, but I have to put them aside. That's what it is to be a kshatriya, you see. And a kshatriya, which is the third caste, the warrior caste, is the caste from which leaders would be drawn, because the kshatriya has the capacity to act according to principle rather than just according to personal preference. The Vaishya is always, that's the caste below, is always just getting for themselves, making work for me. And that makes them a very bad leader. The kshatriya leader is acting on principle for the welfare of all. And if one is karmically appropriate to have leadership responsibility, and therefore it may be bigger than one is already, but it's the right size too big. It's the too big I can pull myself into and manage to cope with. Then the necessity to carry out responsibilities, to act from principle, is just the edge we need to work in a mature way with our own feelings. Not suppressed, not denied, but not allowed to run the show. And maybe sometimes behavior has to be modified. Maybe circumstances have to be adjusted. Maybe I or the individual leader has to make certain choices that are not necessarily ideal, but are better than the alternative. And I found that responsibility saves me. It elevates my feelings. And then, by the grace of God, everything else unfolds in the right way. God bless you, my friend.